It's been a great morning. Welcome back and good afternoon. Next, we have a session on workforce in digital first world. Let's welcome our speakers for this session, Ms. Anna Roy and Ms. Aruna Rao. Anna is from the Indian Economic Service. In the government, she has worked in Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Civil Aviation, and Niti Aayog. In Niti Aayog, she heads the vertical dealing with data management and frontier technologies. Aruna is advisor, technology strategy at Kotak Mahindra Bank Limited. In this role, she assists the banks identify potential game-changing technology to adopt and leverage. During her 20-year career in Citicorp Software, Polaris, she was group head of corporate banking technology, where she built the business in cash management, trade finance, and treasury systems. Ms. Rao is a director on the board of a global technology products organization. To anchor this session, we have Vijay Jain. Vijay has been recognized as the 100 retail icons of India, the people, events, and ideas that transformed India's consumption story. Selected by Google as a case study. Built a retail business from scratch, transforming a family-run business into India's most trusted diamond jewelry brand, Aura, with a national presence.
Welcome, everybody. It's awesome to be here today. And I have been very, very fortunate because I've spent more than half my working career trying to bring a smile to women's faces. And it's been really a wonderful journey, understanding their pains, their joys, their challenges. And when Arunjita asked me to be a part of WIT, I just couldn't say no. Not only because of the fact that, it had three things which are very close to my heart, which is technology, which is second is equality, and more importantly, gender equality. And third was policy. But more importantly, I have two uber talented women who I have a chance to share the dais with. Miss Anna Roy, who is a senior advisor with Niti Aayog, and Aruna Rao, who is also an executive director at Gender at Work. And the strange part is that in Jan, I had written an article with some of my future insights to the chairman of a very large conglomerate. And when I look at that article today, it virtually appears that I've written it post-pandemic. And I think the biggest learning for me is really the fact is that not that these are the emergence of new trends, but the fact that these trends have got accelerated by perhaps 5 to 10 years. And a sense of discomfort which we are feeling is really on account of this acceleration. And this acceleration is really important is because, if you look at, example of, let's say, the telephone, it perhaps took 75 years to reach 50 million people. The TV took only 13, the internet only 4 years. So an acceleration of 5 to 10 years really means a huge amount of impact. And the two areas we are really looking to focus on is the impact on work in the new economy. And second is really the entire impact on the social part. Because while technology is bringing about a certain amount of convergence, we are seeing a huge amount of disparity, whether it's on income levels between the rich and the poor, whether it's on the income levels of men and women, whether it's the income opportunity in urban and rural India, and a whole host of other things. And for all of you who are Harry Potter fans, we are the cusp of change. And, Professor Dumbledore tells Harry, it's not your abilities, but it's your choices which define you. And with that in context, I'm going to ask Aruna the first question. Aruna, you've had a very interesting long career, first with Citibank, then with Kotak, having worked with both a multinational as well as, Indian professional company. And if we were to look at the workplace of the future, what are the key changes that you really see?
Okay. Thank you, Vijay. First, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me on the panel. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And to respond to your question about how I see the workforce changing, I think actually this has already started off because many industries have been already thinking digital first, mobile first for a period of time. Financial services, e-commerce organizations, logistics organizations have already been significantly involved in this. So the workforce in these industries have also started to change. And I'll explain that a little bit more with a little experience that we have. We used natural language processing, a form of AI, to develop a voice bot, which would greet the customers when they called into the call center at the Kotak Mahindra Bank. And we trained it to respond to simple queries like, what is my account balance? My debit card is lost. What shall I do? Things like that. And we found that the bot could successfully respond to the entire query and close it without having any need to send the call to the agent at all. And predictably, the number of calls landing at the agent's desk decreased. And over time, this started to raise a certain amount of concern among the workforce for their jobs. But what actually happened is something very interesting. We saw that the job content changed. The agents now had to respond to more complex queries, things like, why is my interest lower this month? How is the interest calculated? So the agent had to understand more about banking, understand the domain a little more. So the content became richer. And that was our first takeaway, that as the digital first comes into play, the job content is going to become richer, more domain content, and the workforce is going to require a bit of additional training to make them really viable over there. So I think that was an interesting learning for us. Another aspect is that we had sort of assumed that the entire workforce was computer literate. And we found that leave aside being computer literate, a lot of people did not really even know how to use a smartphone effectively. And we found this out when we started offering account opening online and followed it up with the Know Your Customer process, where the agent had to meet the customer in person just to collect the documents and scan it on their mobile phone. And we found that they didn't know how to check for an internet connectivity. We didn't know how to scan a document. So you have to start at that end. So we had the learning for us was across the entire spectrum. We have to train the people both in the computer areas as well as in the domain.
So you make a very interesting point. And Ms. Roy, I want to ask the next question leading up from what she's spoken about. Is that, we've seen this unprecedented growth of both technology and increase in jobs or the pay per person increase. And my question really is that, given India, the complexity, the diversity, the different levels of formal and informal education, what role is technology going to really play? And do you see our ability to leverage that, translating both into higher income for the country and for individuals? So my question is really, will it impact both the country as well as the social structure of the country?
Thank you, Vijay, and good morning, everybody. So basically, what I would like to start off is refer to your article, which you wrote in Jan and appeared to be a post-pandemic article. I think the same goes for Government of India as regards policy making and the digital space. The Digital India mission, which was actually launched in 2006, was actually given a big push in 2014. And the banking, the digital banking, which Aruna just referred to, is basically a result of that push. The Jan Dhan movement, the JAM Trinity, and all that brought together, it's as if we were preparing for something like this to happen. with the infrastructure growing, with the UPI kind of a public good, which allowed 1,000 flowers to bloom really in the digital payment space. So I would, with hindsight, we are always more knowledgeable in hindsight. In hindsight, you would feel that, okay, the government was preparing to have technology as a backup plan in case of a situation like this. Now, why do I say that? The pandemic, the first thing the pandemic has really brought to fore is really the social distancing, work from home, basically something which was unheard of, especially in the government. In the government, if you are not in office 9 to 5, and after the Aadhaar biometric, if you do not do the biometric, your presence, whether you're working wherever, it's not recorded. So it was a big shift in the mind. It required a big shift in the mindset, and I would say the government was extremely proactive and responsive to the situation that emerged. That the first order which came from the government was to enable the IT sector to work from home, when the government allowed through various regulations to enable it. And it was welcomed very, the entire IT industry welcomed it very well. So I feel technology is really important. We came out, the Niti Aayog came out with our AI strategy in 2018, where one of the underlying narratives was, do not look at technology as a technology, but look at what it can help you achieve. And human in the loop kind of a concept was floated, where we said that for a country like India, which has so many barriers, even after 7 decades since our independence, we still cannot provide the best health, best education services in major parts of the country. So with such access barriers, and Aruna also spoke about the knowledge, not being able to kind of use the devices. There also, I think technology really, especially AI kind of a thing, now you don't have to place a specialist, say, at a district hospital or at a public health center. All that can be accessed. So I think with access barriers in major social sectors that we today, technology comes in very handy, something like AI and all. It also comes in very handy for a country which has such difficult terrains also, whether it is drones, whether it is IoT, whether, any other technology, the GIS, etc. It helps you monitor, map, implement projects better. And now with the pandemic, technology will come to your rescue, because this the present panel discussion which we are having, a year back I would have said no, because that would have meant me traveling to some place which was very difficult. So I have been doing more panel discussions, because now I can do it from my place of work or my place of home. So I think technology is enabling, it's the biggest enabler in today's world. And with the new kind of a new normal which has come about with this pandemic, I think technology is will be our biggest friend going forward.
No, so that is actually phenomenal, ma'am, about what you've said. And I think to get a large, structure like the government of India with, different levels of hierarchy, diversity, to think so differently is absolutely amazing. And I think that's a session for a more detailed discussion, but it's absolutely amazing. Aruna, my question is more simplistic in that sense, is that, what the government of India has been able to do in a larger sense. Sometimes in the corporate culture, do you find it a challenge to see a quick enough response time? See, so when I look at a large number of the corporates, okay, while it's been phenomenal the way they've learned up, a lot of them were really caught unaware. And sometimes as CTOs, heads of businesses, you're aware of this. So how easy or difficult is the decision-making process? And I know you consult with other people as well. So not necessarily your own specific with the jobs you worked in, but more broadly is, how do you see the ability of organizations to make that decision, and more so in today's environment where you don't have the luxury of time?
Okay. So I think, Vijay, there have been certain industries which have traditionally learned to leverage technology, either because, that they didn't have a choice, or because it was easier to do so. And I think the banking financial services, which I'm more familiar with, is certainly an area where it was already second nature to think about how technology could improve. And there is this burning zeal to continuously explore new things, if necessary, in small baby steps, not necessarily boil the whole ocean and change the way you work at one shot, but try it out and keep making progress and taking it forward. And it's not, it's now almost hygiene, because if you don't, just standing in place is not good enough. You're going to be left behind. So I think certain industries have done a great deal already. But I think there are many other industries where it's probably necessary to start leveraging more. And I refer to what Anna Roy said when she said that it's not necessary to put an expert medical person in every location. I think telemedicine is an area that is ripe for leveraging of technology. Already, due to the pandemic lockdown, we are seeing a lot of video consultations with doctors, partly because the doctor can't reach the remote location, and partly because they do not want patients with smaller ailments coming into a dangerous situation in a hospital. But I think this can be taken much further. AI has already been proved to be useful in the diagnosis of critical illnesses. And in fact, there are proven, demonstrated situations where surgery has been done remotely through technology. A surgeon is in country one, the patient is in country two, and over a video using a robotic arm, the surgeon can instruct the robotic arm to perform the surgery. And that might seem futuristic, but it's been done, and it's just a little way off. So I think a lot more leveraging to be done, which will help the community and revive the economy.
So one of the questions which I want to ask Ms. Roy, ma'am, the corporate sector experiments, innovates, and has this ability to take a big call. As policy makers, I think the government of India has taken some huge and very large calls. And perhaps you didn't have the luxury of running that innovation over a period of time. You could have done a lab test, but I'm saying you had to somewhere take a large call to both allocate resources and manpower. And especially with the government of India, when you have such limited amount of resources and so many priorities. And what would be interesting is to just understand, how the process went, and how in today's situation, where the need to respond is much quicker, the need to take large calls is much, much larger without necessarily knowing what the possible outcomes could be, and the ability to calibrate during those big calls. Is there any lesson which the rest of us could really take forward, ma'am, in the corporate sector, or as individuals, or even in the social sector?
So I'm reminded of this joke which was doing the the WhatsApp rounds early days of pandemic, that who is responsible for the IT development of your organization? Is it the COVID or the CTO? And that kind of defines it. While I agree with Aruna, there is a need in the private sector, so it is more or less bottom line driven. So when when you want to cut cost, when you want to increase improve resource allocation, so that defines the private sector motivation. So you may not find private sector going into areas where, suppose, the externalities are high, but government, on the other hand, needs per se to focus in areas where which are more in the nature of public goods, where externalities are higher, and where you won't have private initiative really coming in a big way. Small things I would like to mention. NIC has put in place such a beautiful system now in Niti Aayog, at least, and it has been a long process. In Niti Aayog, at least, we do not have a single physical file. that allowed us during the pandemic to immediately shift to work from home without any disruption whatsoever in any kind of job which is happening. So these are small things, and I think it is more a case of vision and more a case of having a will to perform. These things were there for a long time. Say the UPI was not post 2014. UPI has been there for much longer, but it was leveraged after 2014, and more so after the demonetization, when there was a need to have a behavioral change amongst people to move from a largely cash to a digital payment. So I would think the need is there, and it need most of the time, but the vision is important. If the vision is not there, and if you don't think ahead, then you do not achieve. Private sector, I would say there may be some visionary, initiatives, but largely they are more operational issues. Government has to play that role to have the vision, to take everybody along, to allocate resources. And if you are better prepared, if you are visionary, so like I said, if the digital India was not at the level it was at the start of the pandemic, we would not have been in that position to deal with pandemic and its aftermath the way we did. Like in government, working from home, allowing people for the first 21 days to immediately, remain at home, and only very skeletal staff, who were required for public interface or other such work, only they were allowed to come to office. You could not have done without bringing the entire government machinery to a crunching halt, which did not happen. And it was because government had the wherewithal in place, we had technology available, and it was, I think, because of the vision. And about allocation, I know funds and all, these are things which are not, cannot be done very, very fast. So there again, if you have the vision, if you are prepared, and based on your level of preparedness, that also kind of, comes in handy. So I would bring it down to the vision of the leadership when it comes to the government.
No, so I think it's absolutely amazing for the vision to be taken in such a complex environment. And I think, in that sense, the corporate sector has had to learn to work from home. Because I think, people have evolved, people didn't take their laptops, the data was not there, it had to be digitized, they didn't have the bandwidth, security measures were not in place. So Aruna, I want to ask the next question to you. And I want to share this little narrative of my own nephew, who is in Bombay. And he asked his boss if he could go to Pune and work from there. And his boss readily agreed. And my question, therefore, really is the fact is that as we learn to work from home or work away from office, if I could use that terminology, the question is that does it really change the opportunities for people both in urban and non-urban areas? I'm not necessarily saying rural areas, but non-urban areas. And how much of the work can actually be done? And therefore, do we see a much fairer play in terms of opportunities for people across the sector?
Okay. So, as you said, Vijay, we've been talking for a while that corporates were possibly having some concerns of using the work from home mode of working for all roles. So there were some concerns, but forced by this pandemic lockdown, this has started to happen. And this is happening, I think, for a couple of reasons. The first major challenge, as you said, was concern over security. The ability to log in to enterprise systems where customer data is available in a secure manner without having, fraud potential, things like that, was the first challenge. And I would say a lot of organizations had the framework or infrastructure available for it. What needed to be done was to scale it, because if you had maybe 100 people working from home, you needed to very quickly make it 1,000. But the framework was in place, and it was about a scaling kind of thing. So I think that was the first challenge which got cracked. After that, the softer learnings had to come about. That is, how do you parcel out tasks, little tasks which individuals could work on home? And then how do you monitor this? How do you ensure collaboration between the people working from home on a single project or on a single deliverable? So I think those learnings have started to come about. And I think as we are getting confident in this, definitely the ability or the potential for remote working is getting bigger. And this is particularly true because we've seen that it's good for the employees, the existing employees who don't have to face that, difficult 1 hour commute each way. It's really good for corporates because now you can throw your talent acquisition net much further. And of course, it's also great because you have people working in remote locations, like, possibly your nephew who is in Pune. And Pune is already a big city. I can quite see tomorrow it could be Nasik or Bangalore or anything else, where that person can compete for a job position as effectively as anyone in a local position. So I think now that the mindset has eased, the actual technical concerns have been resolved, I think it's become very feasible to do so.
So I want to ask you one more question regarding this: is what does it really mean for women? Really, and when I say for women, it's not a sexist statement. I'm talking more about in parts of India, where the access both to education and the ability for free movement is restricted. And do you see this, the ability to work from home and access to technology helping to some extent, build barriers towards women and job opportunities?
Yeah. So I think it is definitely true. I'm just going to give you a small example of women, benefiting from this work from home, even in the current workforce, in the current jobs. In my own experience, we need to support banking systems 24/7, and so you always need to have a night shift as well. So there's always a little bit of concern of having women on the night shift because you need to make sure that they have a reasonable form of transport to and from office at nights. And suddenly with this ability to work from home, that constraint just disappeared. It just dissolved. And the women had the opportunity to take any shift that they want, and they could be as effective in the night shift. And the managers just loved it because they had a larger workforce to choose from in being in rostering those night shifts. So I can already see that benefit for existing women, even in the existing jobs in urban cities, and that just continues for the kind of rural areas, because as I said, once the confidence of being able to offer jobs remotely builds up in the corporates and organizations, they would be happy to increase the talent search to more remote locations. And I think for women as well, who are living in smaller cities where possibly there is some level of conservatism in having women move out of their homes during the day, at night. This work from home option is great because you can stay at home, have your presence at home if necessary, and still hold down a job. The other aspect is when you work from home, it is only one step away to having flexi hours. If you're working from home, you don't have to make it 9 to 5. You can possibly do it earlier in the morning or later at night. So that makes it easier for women, who often have to share a larger burden of the, managing of the family, especially in the smaller rural towns. So I think that just opens up a lot of opportunities for women in remote areas.
So hold that thought, Aruna. I think it's very interesting. We'll come back to that. But I'm just going to ask Ms. Roy a question to a statement you made in your previous answer, and which was really this issue of collaboration. And I think one of the big shifts which we are seeing is collaborative work happening in today's environment and work. And ma'am, the question really to you is that given the complexity of the government of India having to work not only with state governments and in some of its own concurrent lists, but also the fact that the diversity is very, very large in terms of language, in terms of skill sets, in terms of availability, in terms of attitude, in terms of promotions. So there's a very large complexity which exists. And how is the response to work in collaboration with an environment which is so large and so complex? And is technology being a large enabler? And then what is your thought on that?
So are you referring to our work in the government
Yes,
per
ma'am.
se or general? Okay.
I'm speaking more on a government because I think there's a large amount of
Yes.
learning for I think corporate India and the social sector to learn from what the government has been able to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think there also technology will be the enabler again. And when we speak about the diversity, uh, there again, and if you let me take an example of internet use. As per some reports going forward, every 9 out of 10 new internet users will be Indic language in India. Having said that, largely the internet is having, English based content. So seeing that, we embarked on a project of having a NLP, more streamlined, which will address this, so that if I'm in Karnataka, I don't need to learn English in order to, develop an app or, develop any content for the internet. And that went off very well, and now it is with METI, and METI is taking it forward. So I think there also, and given the diversity also of skill sets, everything, I think there also, how do you assign roles to people is important. And I give the example of Niti Aayog, where Niti Aayog has this good combination of government officers working uh, in a team with contractual experts, professionals, even young professionals who are taken from the market. So I think government has really shown the way on how you can work in collaboration between government and private sector, so that you overcome some of these skill gaps, because working in the government, you may not have the time, or you are not open to new ideas. So how can you get the private sector people who bring ideas in the fresh thought to the government system? So I would, in my view, I think this Niti Aayog initiative, which is also now seen in other ministries, where joint secretaries, and also there are talks of having DS and deputy secretary and director level officers intake laterally. So this lateral entrance from private sector into the government is one of the initiatives taken by government to kind of address this skill and speciality issue. And of course, if you see the language barrier, most of our websites are providing content in various Indic languages, and that is a stress which we are placing on. So I think government has taken several bold steps to work in that environment. And it is like Niti Aayog's mandate, it is more about cooperative federalism, cooperative and competitive federalism, instead of a top-down approach which was followed in the previous decades, where the center will tell the states, these are the schemes you should take, this much money you will get for ABC schemes, this you can spend, this you cannot spend. So, a bottom-up approach in implementation of projects, that is the other new thing which has been, was experimented through Niti Aayog, and it has come off very well, where states are working with the center, and it's not as if there is a big brotherly approach where I know all and you don't know. So I think these are the small things, but they add up to having a huge impact in how we work in the government, overcoming the diversity, overcoming skill gaps, and overcoming several other issues, and work as a big whole of a government kind of a concept. Here I would like to also mention about Arogya Setu, which is considered to be one big technology, initiative of the government. Now, how did it come about? I was initially, I can share with you, it was actually from the private sector. Deep Kalra from Make My Trip kind of, sent a note to Mr. Kant suggesting this, and Mr. Kant immediately said this is workable. A few days later, even Prashant Tandon from 1MG sent a similar kind of a thing. But then they had engineers with them. They started developing, and a team was formed with some government people, NIC, etc., and the private sector, and largely driven by private sector. And today the app, and we had the academia reviewing the structure of Arogya Setu, working on the platform. So it was such a beautiful, cohesive kind of a thing without any kind of fixed kind of a thing in place. So I think rather than have a fixed system, we should look at how we can work in synergy with various diverse groups, and more work with an outcome-oriented approach. I think that is what is important.
It is fascinating to hear this, because it's almost like I'm chatting with the CEO of a private sector with impact which is far larger and independent of the controversy around Arogya Setu app. I have to say that I've been using it. Okay, so I think it's excellent. Now, one of the
actually, Vijay, would you mind if I jump in and just add to a little bit of what Anna said about the collaboration between the government and the private sector? Even in the previous question, she had sort of responded by explaining the vision that the government had in laying down the infrastructure, the UPI, the IMPS, and digital signatures, and so many. And I totally agree with you. I think that's been amazing, because if you compare other countries, I think there are a few other countries who can boast of an immediate payment system like we have today. But I think that infrastructure has to be converted into something of value to customers and to business. Otherwise, the potential is not actually benefited from. So I think the banks and the business community has been enormously creative in thinking about what can you do with this immediate payment structure? What can you do with this UPI? Of course, you can make a payment from me to you and you to me, but that's not good enough. The whole, banking online, e-commerce online, making payments for your gas cylinders, making payments for that dozen bananas that you buy digitally. All of those are solutions that the corporates and the banks have been trying to work on. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But it is that creativity and that willingness to keep trying and pushing the envelope, which has been, shall I say, the jugalbandi between the government, which is creating the infrastructure, and the businesses which are willing to leverage it. And I think this is particularly true in India. And I take the example of APIs, the API platform. We're talking about the open economy and banks making their APIs available to various corporates and other organizations. In other countries, take Europe, there had to be regulation for banks to make the APIs available, and only then it went. And over here in India, as soon as bankers and technologists figured out what an API was and what it could be, it's like you said, Anna, it's 1,000 flowers blooming. All organizations are thinking, here's my API, let me see what business benefit I can get. So I think that has been particularly successful in India, both with the government laying down the infrastructure and the businesses leveraging for customer delight.
So I want to just touch on one point which Ms. Roy spoke about, and I think we've lost the softer and the more exciting part of this entire journey, which is really the social media part of it. And I raise this in a lighter vein, but one of the things is we've talked about languages and how do you communicate to a language to a very diverse population. And I think historically language has been very textual, spoken or textual. And earlier, if somebody was fond of somebody, they wrote a long letter, probably with pen and ink, and then they typed an email. Now, all you need to do is put a social media post out, and it says everything. And so one of the questions which really brings down is that going forward is, what is the primary form of communication we're going to be really seeing? Is it largely going to be translation? Is it going to be more visual? Or we are seeing, so how do you communicate when the diversity becomes very, very large? And Aruna, you were talking about some of your example, at the banking side. So is there anything which you could share in terms of this language being simplified for a large diaspora, whether they're consumers, whether they're workers, whether they're working in the private sector, perhaps government sector?
Well, one of the examples I could give is, the voice bot that I talked to you about earlier, where we are able to respond to customers who call in at the call center. One of our initiatives has been to be able to start doing this in multiple languages. We started off, of course, with English, and then we started Hindi, and now we are starting it into many other regional languages also. So we are using technology to understand not only the language, but even the local dialects and the accent differences, and even the turn of phrase, if you will. Some people call it, what is the amount in my account, or what is the balance in my account. So the turn of phrase is also kind of important. So we're leveraging AI and other technologies to be able to provide this information across multiple languages. The same is true in communicating with our customers on other channels. For example, on our ATMs, the screen is not necessarily in English. And if you were to go to Karnataka, you would see it in Kannada, and so on and so forth. So I think changing languages is definitely one. The other thing is even on your phones and things like that, we use speech bots. If you could ask your mobile banking application to, you can tell it to transfer money from one account to another, a bit like an Alexa or a Siri, so that people can use language rather than written, typed out kind of things. And in a futuristic way, there is augmented reality. For myself, I have long been thinking, what is this virtual reality, augmented reality technology going to be used for? It's been sort of like a solution without a problem in a banking or in a corporate sector. And perhaps now that we have this need for remote working, for building relationships with people in a remote location, perhaps we finally have a use case to don these augmented reality glasses and start to feel that we are actually in the room with one another. So I think all of these ways of leveraging technology for improving communications are out there, some more feasible than others.
So I was actually going to ask the next question to you, Aruna, but I'm going to ask this to Ms. Roy. And I'm going to ask this question to her because it largely relates to the corporate sector. And if you look at it, the corporate sector is always, and perhaps the government as well, has seen employees as a fixed cost. So, you go, you hire the employees, and then you say, I'll build scale through efficiency. Now, post-pandemic, one of the most interesting things what we are seeing is that this fixed cost has suddenly become variable cost right across India. Corporates are saying now, I will only use the skill sets which I require as I scale up, versus seeing it. And I think the future accountants are going to reflect employees as a variable cost and not as a fixed cost. And ma'am, what is your sense in this? Because, as a government of India, and more importantly, Niti Aayog, thinks through this entire structure of being able to scale. So I think the two interesting things which is happening is that perhaps the efficiency and therefore the number of people which you require to scale is coming down. That is one part. And two is scaling up as you grow along. So which means that there is going to be some amount of impermanence in jobs, in terms of opportunities. And while the government of India may be perhaps a bit more insulated, employees of government of India perhaps may be far more insulated, do you see that as a permanent thing, or do you see that evolving as well, both from a private sector and from the government sector, ma'am?
Let me start with government. There is, it's been there for very long, I presume, for all government, not only government of India, but also government like PSU banks, public sector banks. I have been on the boards of several public sector banks, small and big. So they have this provision that at 58, 60 is the retirement age. So at 58, you will review the performance of the person. And if you feel that it is not up to the mark, you can compulsorily retire them. There is this provision. Now, the problem in the governments is we have the very best of, provisions in place, whether rules, regulations, guidelines, but it is the implementation which has been wanting. Now, when I was in the banks, this would routinely come, and as a director on the boards, it would come to us, and we had a committee, and we had to go through it and say who will do what, and whether anybody is retired. Well, this was something which was unsaid rule that nobody retires. I used to say at least retire one person. There is a long list, and it's not as if everybody is at the like you say goda gadha barabar type of a thing. In the government also there were at least I don't remember anybody I knew who was retired under this particular provision. Only recently the government took this position and compulsorily retired a huge bunch of people under this provision. So I think it is the intent we also, which is more important rather than the rules. So we did have a rule of of ensuring that you do not regard this as a fixed cost, and it should be variable. The second thing, I think government is opening up to this, to look at, filling up, like I earlier said, lateral entries. So when you say lateral entry, that means one post is less for a person who comes through the route of writing an exam and getting into a service. So one post allocated to a private sector means a lesser number of posts for the government, because government as a whole is not expanding. So the kitty is not expanding. So reallocation of posts. So that is the second thing, which I would say the government is being responsive to the needs of the hour. Obviously, being government, being the public sector, you cannot have extremely, extremely radical changes all of a sudden, where you say you are contractual, and if you are in a service, civil service, after 10 years, will review and you could be out. You cannot do such things. In government, given the nature of the job, given the need for institutional memory, given various other things, you cannot have these radical changes without certain preparation and without certain lead time. One doesn't know going forward what will happen. The way with technology, it is changing so much. But future of work is certainly an area which is an area of concern when we talk about private sector as well as government, because government also has PSUs. And if you do not perform, and if you do not have the necessary skill set, something would need to be worked on it, because at the end of the day, again, in the government, it is outcome oriented, because all our appraisals in expenditure, etc., has now moved over to outcome oriented implementation of schemes. And also in PSUs, this is increasingly being focused on going forward. In my view, government needs to, future of work is something government needs to really be very, very focused on, have policies, because I tend to give the example of computerization in banks, which was said to lead to huge job losses, but it led to higher productivity and more people, because new type of services come up. But that is easier said than done, and computerization was more linear. What we are looking at, technology growth is more exponential. So having to deal with that, skilling becomes very important. You cannot suddenly make one person who is doing a job to shift to job D which requires a different set of skill sets. The good news is the new type of technology which is coming up is more diffusive. You do not need to go through a 3 year of engineering to kind of, do something, a big power plant or whatever. It is so diffusive that in US and all, already after a humanities graduation, you could do a 3 months course and Google will hire you for coding. So given that diffusion, given that the technology has both pros and cons, I think a more nuanced approach, a more outcome oriented approach would need to be in place on skilling, on to see like drones. It will open up a huge new segment of manufacture of drone, maintenance of drone, operation of drones, various other things. So while traditional jobs may come down, the assembly line kind of jobs may come down, there will be other kind of jobs, but in order to leverage that, in order to capitalize on that, skilling will have to be kind of looked at very, very seriously, and a detailed approach needs to be built on how we can capitalize on this without causing huge large scale kind of distress through job loss. And like distance working, the work from home kind of a thing where your physical presence is not required, that also helps to a large extent to address that distress, because I don't have to shift to another city, and perhaps I don't have to face my other skills which are not relevant. I don't have to fix on that. I can work on the skills which are more relevant to the job. So I think it's a mixed bag of pros and cons, and we need a more nuanced and targeted approach. And let me tell you, Niti Aayog is working on future of work, and they are working on some kind of they are working on a paper. Hopefully it will be released soon on how to go forward.
So, ma'am, you kind of answered the last question, which I was really going to ask you, which is brilliantly put together. And you've touched on multiple issues. So I think you've touched on this entire, urban-rural divide. You've touched on about the softer skills sometimes because of which people don't get a job opportunity, and the fact that they can focus on what they want to do, the fact that they can access it from home. But I think the most important thing which you talked about was really this entire issue of diffusive technology. And I think one of the biggest things really is the fact that all that we've learned in the past is no longer relevant. And there's this entire old workforce which has learned in a traditional mechanism, and there's this entire new native or the youngsters who are coming into the system. And Aruna, my last question is really to you, is that what is really the skill sets which you think which people need to acquire, or is it a mindset? So are we talking about skill sets, or are we talking about mindsets? And especially in the context of diffusive technology, which Ms. Roy talked about, because everything we've learned so far is perhaps it's got a very short shelf life.
So I think you already said it yourself in a way, Vijay. In the very first question you asked me, how is the workforce going to change? And I said, it's going to require retraining. So I think a big aspect is going to be constant retraining, constant ability to learn, a willingness to embrace change is going to be key in going forward, because it's a cliche, but change is the only constant. And as the businesses continue to look for opportunities, and where the way of working, the demands of the customers are changing, the employees are going to have to continuously reinvent themselves. Everybody from school teachers who used to teach their students in person, who now have to deliver their class lectures, so in a virtual kind of way, using whiteboards rather than blackboards, all the way to office workers. Everybody's going to have to continuously, I think, retrain and change on that. So that's, I think, the major requirement, going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Roy, Ms. Rao. It's absolutely been wonderful. Thank you for taking out time. And I think there's lots of pearls of wisdom, both from an organization, country, and as an individual perspective to take away. So it's been absolutely wonderful having you both on the panel. And thank you so much from myself and WIT.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, Aruna, and Vijay.